What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I am back from a little bit of a hiatus of my own after the bye week. I thought that would be a necessary week of rest for me. It appears I caught some bug. If you caught my last episode, you could hear in my voice. I thought I had just lost it from the game against Rice, but no, it just turns out that I was sick. And then I got a stomach bug as the week went on. So it was really, not firing on a single cylinder, to say the least. And so I really just could not get a show out there. I, was struggling the day before we left for the game against North Texas, but I am back and I am here to recap another Tulane win. A win that, maybe it could have been a little more of a convincing win for Tulane, but I don't really, know to an extent why that matters. Ultimately this was a game where you went into it, you knew that this was going to be the biggest test in terms of an offense that Tulane was going to have to face. I mean, they're top 3 in the country in total and passing offense. Chandler Morris holds like every single record fathomable, throws regularly 400 plus yard contests. But Tulane was ultimately the better team out there. And I think that despite having, a less exciting game plan, if you will, although to me, having 2 running backs like Mekhi Hughes and Arnold Barnes is very exciting. Not to mention, I think they really just got back to their roots on offense. It might have been a little more run heavy and less balanced than people might have liked, but ultimately, this is an offense that wants to establish, lean on the run, and then hit those explosive plays in the passing game. To stop a team like North Texas, you have to be able to control the tempo. That's really about controlling the clock, time of possession, and you just don't do that with 40-yard passes downfield. You do it with the methodical pummeling by our Arnold Barnes and Mekhi Hughes. And we saw them do that against Rice. The difference was it took them a quarter to do so, and then the key passes that would have made that game a different conversation ended up being critical drops in the end zone. You saw Tulane bounce back from that in this game in both ways. Mekhi Hughes literally hit his career high before halftime. I don't feel like that got enough attention. I think it was 167. He had 169 yards going into halftime. I mean, that is unbelievable. And even more so when you compare it to looking at their start against Rice, 40 yards on 10 carries into the tunnel, 100 yards in the second half. This game was just unbelievable, not just by what he was able to do, but what Arnold Barnes was able to do just as well. He had 11 carries for 78 yards, but averaged over 7 yards a carry, 7.1. I mean, that's a 1-2 punch. That passing game, there was one team that threw 57 passes. There was one that threw 13. The team that won was the latter. And ultimately, that's really what this winning formula is for Tulane. They are a team that brought linemen to media day. They have a blue-collar mentality. They have Mekhi Hughes. But you also had your receivers stepping up in critical moments in this game. You also saw just the passing game click better. Yes, Darian Mensah threw one poor interception. I'll get into that in my breakdown. But Mario Williams, Yulkeith Brown, and Alex Bauman, those touchdowns were as great as you could ask for from both sides. But I also wanted to shout out Dante Fleming because I forgot to mention him in my offensive breakdown. He was the leading receiver, but every catch was as critical and as physical as you could ask for. He had 3 catches for 92 yards. One of those was a really important third down conversion where he started behind the line of scrimmage and ended up very far downfield and showed kind of a different wrinkle than I think we've been used to. But ultimately, I think that for a team that was able to only score 17 points offensively last week, Sam Howard had their other touchdown, to have 45 in this game and have it come in the way that it did in one of the more efficient outings possible with 3 touchdowns on 13 pass attempts. And then all of the scores by Hughes. Ty Thompson had a rushing touchdown. And then Yulkeith Brown, Mr. Efficiency, 1 reception touchdown, 2-point conversion, 1 rush for a touchdown. He said thank you and goodbye and did his part. And I think that's ultimately what you saw out of this team. And the defense, they played less good than they did the weekend prior. They faced the most explosive offense they're really going to see. Chandler Morris was as good as advertised, and you really couldn't ask for a better learning experience that ultimately they were able to close out. Yeah, it was a close one at the end, but they never lost the lead and they never lost control. And that's something that I think you can really say about this year's team. even in the games where they haven't necessarily had it to start, they haven't totally fallen out of the contest. In the Oklahoma game, I'd say the only one where they really didn't have any type of momentum to start the game. I suppose you could say yes against Rice as well, but that game felt, again, 21-0 against Oklahoma, could have gotten out of hand, but that fight to me just continues to apply, and it mattered in this win over North Texas. So the thing I really want to stick to on this episode is big ideas, because I think that's really what you're looking at here for Tulane in this very abnormal season stretch for them, where they are one of 2 teams in the nation to have back-to-back road games on a short week. It's something that really shouldn't happen in the schedule, because we get on a plane on Wednesday. We just got back on Saturday night from this game against North Texas. So these next couple of weeks, I don't really know how much you're trying to, learn about this team, dominate, hit on all cylinders, as much as you are just, quite frankly, trying to get out of Dodge. I think that the American is in a lot better position this time this year than it is for what it was this time last year in terms of the quality of the opponents Tulane was facing at the times they were facing them. It really felt like you had to wait until they played Memphis and UTSA, that were kind of those big dogs that year, with some teams kind of coming on as the season went on, but a lot of teams starting off, for lack of a better term, a mess. And Tulane didn't really get any convincing victories away from those opponents. This year, it was a little surprising to me to see Rice's coach get fired in the middle of the year, because I maintain the fact that might have been the hardest defensive performance that Tulane has had to overcome in terms of what they were able to do on their front and pressure. But it felt like that team was just kind of clicking on all cylinders at the right time. And you look back to the UAB game, which truly seems like ages ago. At that same time, there was kind of a meltdown going on in Charlotte, where the defensive coordinator was kind of getting into it with fans on Twitter. But what I really noticed was their head coach, in stark contrast from UAB's, took accountability immediately that Monday in a press conference, saying how unacceptable it was. And I think that was kind of a turning point in their season for them, where things could have really gone the way of what we're seeing happen for a team like the Blazers. But instead, they took accountability and they're starting to kind of pull things together. North Texas, when Tulane faced them this time last year, their defense was leaky, but it was a lot leakier. And where Tulane kind of punched them in the mouth this time around, it felt like North Texas did when they played them last year. And I know I keep bringing up, the games that Tulane played last year, and that might get frustrating to some people because these are different players to an extent. But it's hard to ignore the fact that even though these games haven't felt like, oh, well, Tulane should have won by, more than a touchdown, they were really, really having to work for wins against these teams that they played last year in Rice and North Texas, where it was a 2-point win for Tulane that they really had to go down to the wire against Rice. And with how dominating of a performance that was on the defensive side against the Owls, that game never felt like it was out of the control of Tulane. When they played North Texas last year, if you ask me, Tulane lost control of the plot. The Mean Green, it's very confusing, came out of halftime. They scored immediately on that first series. I believe Tulane matched with a touchdown. Then they proceeded to score 21 unanswered points. Tulane had a 21-0 lead. That was then 28-27. And then North Texas ties at 28 all with 3 back-to-back touchdown drives. And then they recover the onside kick in that game. Michael Pratt had to run in the game-winning touchdown at the end of that matchup in a game where he also made mistakes, just like we saw Darian Mensah make. Michael Pratt threw an interception against North Texas right before halftime. And then that might have been the fumble that he lost. So he had 2 turnovers that mattered in that game. And that was a moment that, you definitely felt like the turnover mattered in that instance. I mean, you look at all the turnovers that Tulane has been able to produce on the defensive side, and immediately North Texas capitalized on that. But, going into this matchup, if you're looking at, for me, I really noticed that Tulane isn't making the same mistakes twice. And they're not even mistakes. It's more, this was something that either didn't execute as well or was a point of weakness, immediately turns around the next week and becomes a point of strength. And there's no better exemplification of that than Mekhi Hughes, which really this conversation should just be about. He goes into the tunnel at halftime against Rice last week with 40 yards on something like 10 carries, ends up having 100 yards in the second half and really just pummeling that team to victory by sheer will with a lot of help from the offensive line. This game, it was a very cool moment. Mekhi Hughes hits his career high before halftime. He got up to 169. I think he ended the day with, let me just look at that right now, 195 net yards. He lost one. Corey and Steve are starting to talk about that in my ear. And I asked him, I'm like, Mekhi Hughes is about to hit his career high. They're like, yeah, it's about 3 yards away. And so I started kind of, alerting our SID on the sidelines because no one really had any clue. It wasn't like there was a jumbotron like there is in basketball where all the players' individual stats kind of hang in the middle of the field. But that alone just really goes to show the difference from last week. Yeah, it was led a lot by Mekhi Hughes, but they also scored quite a bit in the air in that first quarter to go up 21-3. Darian Mensah threw a passing touchdown to Mario Williams and Keith Brown before Hughes finally rushed in a touchdown. If you're looking at an improvement from last week to now, and did the bye week maybe play a factor in the slow start against Rice, you'll never entirely know for sure, but you can at least say that Tulane didn't make the same mistake twice. Unfortunately, and I'll get to this a little on the defensive side because I think there's blame on both sides for what I think was a difference in this game where they really were stout and shut down the game against Rice, I'd say. Tulane really decided when to end that contest. To me, the clock kind of decided the end of the game in North Texas, which, it quite literally does do that. But yeah, it kind of felt like for a while they were allowing North Texas to, they were almost kind of playing with their food in North Texas. And they started to kind of make a meal out of them towards the end, not to get on to some weird tangent there. But, ultimately on the offensive side, it didn't really help that they had 2 back-to-back punts in between the 2 touchdowns at the end of the game for North Texas, both of which had some penalties that you just really can't keep seeing at this point in the year. I think looking forward to this game this weekend, that's something that just can't happen. False starts, holding calls, which erased a first down. It put Darian Mensah in a 3rd and long where he ended up getting sacked. That's all just self-inflicted stuff, but that was also a game where the big question was, are they going to be able to match and shut down the tempo, high-flying offense? I mean, I don't even have a point of reference for how many records Chandler Morris holds, but they're top 3 in the country in total offense and scoring. You're averaging, they've had 40-plus points in their last 4 games, so Tulane held them under that. Chandler Morris regularly throwing for over 400 yards a game. I mean, you could see, and what really stuck out to me on the sidelines was the difference in size, not just from Tulane, but it was so far on the end of the spectrum from what you saw against Rice. It was just, I said this at practice, kind of like, playing skinny when you face a team like the Warriors, where it was just very tiny, quick guys out there. And they were a little bit like gnats for a little bit of the time for Tulane, but you knew what you were kind of getting into in this game. I kind of expected this. I actually, 45 points was a little more than I expected, given I kind of foresaw this being a run-heavy game because there's North Texas threw 57 times and lost the game. Tulane threw 13 passes, or they attempted 13. He completed 10 of them. It's such a wild discrepancy. It's hard for me to even have a rational discussion about which one is better because I think both of them, again, are a little too far on both sides of the spectrum. But how do you control a tempo offense? You keep them off the field. The top 3 in the nation in scoring, total offense, passing, what have you, you keep them off the field. And there is no better way to do that than by using a running back like Mekhi Hughes. But this wasn't just a career game by Hughes. Arnold Barnes, I think, really made just a very solidified 1-2 punch that we talked about as training camp kind of started off, but it just didn't kind of break through for the first couple of weeks. You were also trying to solve a lot of problems elsewhere. And I think you're starting to see these guys that are a little bit, not behind, but not the immediate starters. And, the running backs, there's only one guy out there at a time. Although Tulane does sometimes have 2 out there, but that's a different thing. You saw Arnold Barnes, to me, really just have a breakthrough game that I think deserves as much conversation as Mekhi Hughes does, because I went back and looked at the games this year for Tulane that I would consider meaningful wins. And I'll kind of get to what my, methodology that is imperfect for that. None of them really had a performance where Arnold Barnes, he was, let me just pull up the numbers because I just had them in a last. Mekhi Hughes, cool. Oh, they're on paper form. I'm doing great. Mackay Hughes, he had 30 carries for 195 yards, averaged 6.5 yards a carry. Arnold Barnes had 78 yards on 11 carries. That's 7.1 yards a carry. That it was like just having two bowling balls back there. And there is no better way to demoralize an opposing team than not to have just one, but two guys that can literally punch you in the mouth. I mean, Arnold Barnes, the guys are just flouncing off him like a bowling ball. They're stiff arming guys out there. Keith Brown's touchdown had an incredible block by Mackay Hughes where he just pancaked that guy to the ground. I mean, you talk about a physical team, and Tulane really has that in their running back room. But now they have a really meaningful, looking back at even the Cotton Bowl season, they were kind of trying to figure out who the backup behind Tyjae Spears was, and last year, for that matter, behind Mackay Hughes. And if you ask me, they never really solved the question. I think they're starting to solve that question with Arnold Barnes out there. So if you're able to have an output where you have, 78 yards and 195 yards by two respective running backs, there's really no reason to throw the ball that much. And again, if you look at Tulane's game plan last year against them, it kind of mirrors this one where Michael Pratt was 15 of 21 passes for 195 yards and, 3 passing touchdowns. Pretty much the same deal, except Darian Mensah completed 10 less. They both made a mistake in the air with an interception, but something I wrote in my analysis piece on Sports Illustrated about, the reason I like to go back to these parallels is it matters when I'm talking about, especially guys at the two positions of quarterback and running back, where they are following up incredible best players, top in team history for Tulane of all time, at running back and quarterback. The fact that there has been legitimately no drop off at either position really can't be just stated enough. And yes, you see some freshman mistakes by Darian Mensah. You saw a boatload of those by Michael Pratt in his first season, but you're just seeing a level of execution by Darian Mensah and poise that I can only really describe as Michael Pratt in the Cotton Bowl season, where I look back at wins like Kansas State, where Pratt couldn't really get it done in the air in that game. And he threw a pretty costly turnover because we knew that game was likely going to be a one-score one. And it was a 17-10 win by Tulane. And thankfully the defense was able to make a stop there. They kind of stopped throwing the ball in the second half. The game plan was for Michael Pratt to take that game over with his legs. But to me, really having the ability to just single-handedly do that and then also throw a touchdown pass to Tyreek James that sealed the win for Tulane, that to me, his response to the interception was a lot more important to me than that moment in time, especially because they don't start to pile up. It would be one thing if there were 3 interceptions that we're discussing in these games, but yeah, it was a poor interception by Darian Mensah. Immediately they go out there and they're able to drive down, kick a field goal, and then their first possession out of halftime, to me, that's really where you saw that poise and bounce back, where that was a touchdown by Tulane. It was a 7-play drive for 72 yards, and he completes a 17-yard pass to Mario Williams and then throws one of the best touch passes I've seen to Alex Bauman, where that his return also is undeniable in the impact that he has. But he also, I don't know if he wasn't 100% because of anything other than the fact that the knee brace so obviously hinders such an athletic guy. He looked very athletic today in practice. That's just kind of what I'll leave that as. And he is just such a fighter. He got hurt, or not hurt, but aggravated what was going on earlier in that game, fought his way back. And that touchdown was really, really important for Tulane, especially for, again, to establish him as a red zone threat and take some, heat off of the wide receiver group to get the day done. But also compared to last week where there were drop passes by the wide receivers, there was just clearly miscommunication going on between Darian Mensah and his receiving corps. They were a lot better in this game. Again, they only attempted 13 passes to complete 10 of those. That's pretty much as efficient a day of the office, and 3 of those beat passing touchdowns. That's a lot. That's really making the most of the limited opportunities to throw the football, because again, when your running backs have the day that they do, I don't know why you would really stray away from that. Now, I don't really know how much that's going to work this week. I haven't done, admittedly, enough prep on Charlotte. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around, my wrap up from the Mean Green game. And, today was Wednesday at practice, which really, really confuses me. So I'm going to dive into them a little bit tomorrow. But What I'll just kind of say as an offhand is you saw the flash and you saw the offense to fear in North Texas. You also saw the defense that pretty easily allowed 45 points, and Tulane to relatively have their way with them early on in the game. Whether or not they needed to kind of pull it together a little more at the end of the game, it would have been nice to see. But ultimately, again, that was a game where it never felt like Tulane lost control of the matchup. And that was a marked difference from how they played against them last year. They ultimately did not have control that entire game, allowing those 21 unanswered points and having to win it with a touchdown at the end. And I think you saw a lot of youth on the defensive side, which I'll talk about there. But you also have to account for the fact that Hughes has 30 carries coming into a short week here, where again, they are one of two teams with this tall road task. You would like to see a little more balance, I think, in the passing game. And I think you could probably expect to see that this upcoming weekend. But looking at just what the issues were in last weekend's game, seeing how they applied it here, and then the meaningful wins that I've kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. I looked at their games this season, and I would say that this team really found themselves starting against the Ragin' Cajuns. I think they learned more about themselves in those two losses than Tulane did in their loss to Ole Miss or the loss to Southern Miss the year prior, quite frankly. I think that those are really important moments for this team. And I thought you saw really all three phases make their kind of stand in what was a very overwhelmingly hot game against the Ragin' Cajuns and ultimately stop the spiral there. Then the game against USF, to me, even though it was a blowout, there was really no reason for it to be going into that game. It wasn't expected to be, and that to me was all Tulane. I don't count UAB in this because I said this afterwards. It was just so ridiculous. I didn't really feel like I knew what to take away from that. And then people were super surprised about the performance against Rice. And I was really kind of excited that the team won that way because that's the kind of win that really builds grit and mental toughness. Beating a team by 50 points with ease really doesn't do the same thing. And yeah, the bye week definitely played a factor in that. I would count this probably as their fourth important win of the year. The Southeastern game, it was a blowout victory. I mean, that was just really not that much to take away from, but I think you've seen them now start to build on an identity, a character, and complement both sides of the ball when they're making their respective mistakes, and that not being a trend that continues for more than one game. And it also has to be aware of the opponent, where I can't emphasize enough how explosive North Texas's offense was, scoring 40 plus points in their last 4 games. Tulane ultimately held them. And watching them play against Memphis the game last weekend, that just felt like it was, when I was a Saints fan watching the Saints beat the Giants 49-48. It's like, what is happening here? That's kind of what it felt like, where there was just lead change after lead change. Tulane didn't relinquish the lead. And I don't believe this game was ever tied either. I might be wrong about that. I don't think that I am, but Tulane had the lead. They never lost it. And ultimately, that's all you can ask for as they continue to hold the conference, the best winning streak in the nation, 14 conference games in a row. That just doesn't happen by a fluke. Now, the reason I reference those meaningful wins that I think Tulane has had this year is because looking again at their schedule, just this time last year, I really don't think that they had a meaningful win until Memphis. And you can have the argument about earlier wins. The South Alabama one, maybe yes, but compared to, what I think the expectations were for that team, with all of the draft prospects that they had, Michael Pratt firing on all cylinders in that matchup, you could definitely consider that, I guess, number one. But to me, their really first meaningful win that year came against Memphis. And by the time they got to UNT, that wasn't really a meaningful win for me because, as I just kind of alluded to, I don't think Tulane learned much about themselves other than they had a little bit of a problem. What was going on with coverage? Why it was kind of did they have the ability to go on a 21-point run? And the situational football, getting kind of stunned by that onside kick, which, yes, they were close to recovering one in this game, but they didn't. And that's football. Plays happen. They have been executed and they're over. And Tulane left with the win. But the reason I say that is because I think that you're seeing a more complete team than you are at this time last season. And one that is able to finish these games out, even though the final score might not have really alluded to that. Because as I said, they were going into this time last year against Rice, which, as I said, ended up being a 2-point win that they let a really high lead slip away from them. They let a 21-0 lead get completely erased against North Texas, tied in the fourth quarter, 28 all. And then again, an onside kick with the chance to take it. But this game, they never lost the lead. And that ultimately matters. Yes, it was a one-score game when it came down to it, but we knew kind of what this game would require for Tulane going into this game. And yeah, they looked great against Rice. Rice does not have the explosive offense that they had to face against North Texas. And they had 5 turnovers in that game. They probably should have had 3 in this game, but you're seeing, again, those kind of mistakes by those younger guys. But I think they're important mistakes to make and have be made by these guys, because what I think you're starting to see just as much as anything else is the amount of depth and growth by the young players on Tulane's roster so that they're in the position to be able to close out in critical moments. You know, you look back to last week against Rice, and Javian White is the perfect example, where Caleb Ransaw at spear, slot corner, nickel, just to familiarize what I'm talking about there. You know, he's a true freshman that has to go in and play a really difficult coverage role, a lot of which included shutting down Dean Connors. You saw him make the critical forced fumble tackle at the end of the game that Sam Howard ran in for that touchdown. And you saw him get a lot of playing time in this game as a result. And they had to run quite a different defense than we pretty much seen up to this point all year. You know, they had to play a lot more man coverage than we've seen them do. That's how you really shut down these receivers. And unfortunately, with man coverage, the nature of the game is you're going to get burned sometimes. But how do you respond? We haven't really seen, you know, the secondary get burned per se in some of the ways that we saw North Texas do. But that was to be expected. It is an explosive offense that, you know, they have the amount of 1-yard touchdown drives they have. It's just obscene what they're able to do. And it makes you feel good when you see that all the leading tacklers on Tulane's defense are in the secondary. It matches up because that's really what this game came down to at the end of things. But just to talk about, you know, what they were doing in terms of creativity, there was a point where I saw a dime for the first time where I believe it was Sam Howard came out and they brought in Joshua Moore, had 3 safeties lined up. I don't remember why. Either Tulane called a timeout because they really like to match personnel, but they had another play I saw where they took out Jalen Geiger at safety rather than swapping in another safety there. You know, they kind of went to cover 0. Had Bailey Despaney back there, so I guess cover 1. But they brought Javian White up on the line of scrimmage with Caleb Ransaw, 2 guys that play that spear role to play man coverage, and they ended up making the stop on that play. So, you know, they're asking the defense in the secondary to do a lot more in this game. And it's impossible to ignore as well that Tulane was missing their best defensive tackle against a game where that really would have mattered. And that was because of Patrick Jenkins tragically, unexpectedly losing his mother, who died this last Sunday. And just, you know, my thoughts remain with him. And, you know, they FaceTimed him in the locker room afterwards. You could really tell that the fight that they put in through the end, you know, that was the heart of Patrick Jenkins that they were really thinking of in that moment. But the fact that Tulane was able to just didn't skip a beat losing him, because Cam Hamilton has been so incredibly versatile that despite moving him out to edge so he could get more playing time he'd earned, he started off the year behind Patrick Jenkins, and so he just easily went in there. Parker Peterson might be the dark horse MVP of the defensive line, just because, you know, what he's able to do at nose tackle, where you don't get much of the glory there either. And for him to go from playing the edge, being just kind of buried on the depth chart as a scout player, to meaningful playing time that matters, Matthew Fobbs-White has just completely ascended into a different level. Aiden Huntington over at Bandit. I mean, you're seeing all these things work for Tulane. They just faced a much more prolific offense this week. You know, you also, I think, a great microcosm that shows kind of, you know, why I at least am okay with some of these stretches that might end up in games ending a little closer than you might think. Jack Chinchu, to me, was a player of the game on defense. He was my player of the game on post game. You know, he had 8 solo tackles in that game, but importantly, one of them saved a touchdown, and they were all in really critical moments. One of my sideline hits, it was just all him in that moment. But he's a guy that was a true freshman. He gets hurt during training camp, but you really liked the traits you saw from him. He saw a lot of meaningful playing time against Kansas State. And then he really had to step up to the plate when both him and Kevin Adams, when Bailey Despaney went down with a targeting call against Oklahoma. But to me, it was Sage by Tulane didn't realize, I think, how timely it was. I remember thinking that both Kevin Adams and Jack Chinchu got so much playing time in the Kansas State game. And yeah, you saw some plays where that kind of hurt them. You saw a lot of young guys in that game make mistakes, but then you saw those guys completely take over for someone that was leading the team in tackles, something like 8 to 10 in one quarter in Bailey Despaney against Oklahoma. And the fact that the secondary was able to stay what it was, and now you have it to the point where Kevin Adams and Jack Chinchu are regularly rotating in there with Jalen Geiger and Bailey Despaney, and all of them have the ability to close out games. You just are, but the only way that you do that is by putting these guys in the position to do so, and take the good with the bad, if you will. Because if you look at those last two offensive drives for North Texas, they had to convert 4 fourth downs. It wasn't as if they were just carving up. Again, I referenced Memphis because that game was every possession was, it was very quick, back and forth, breakaway touchdowns, blown plays in coverage where they had to really drive down. It took 20 plays in those 2 drives, a 7-minute drive for their final one. And they had to convert multiple third downs, 3 fourth downs. They got 2 of those by penalty. That's just something that can't happen, but it's also something that it's very easy for Tulane to fix because it's a self-inflicted error. But those were young guys out there, again, getting those penalties in critical moments. You look at Dixon Agu, who forced a fumble. Unfortunately, he had a holding penalty that negated that. But if that doesn't happen, the game is probably over there. And no one's really talking about, does this one score margin matter, which is just, it remains very frustrating as a part of college football that we have to care so much about this when you just don't in the NFL. But ultimately, they made the mistakes. They still closed it out anyways. But now, you look again, I will do this. I know I keep comparing, but injuries. Tulane's been very lucky with health this season, but you've easily seen just what key absences in Caleb Ransaw and Alex Bauman could do to a lot of the struggles against Rice. And I just don't think that they were ultimately 100% in this matchup. And when the receivers were as speedy as they are coming off of a hamstring injury for Ransaw, I expect the coverage to just be stronger this upcoming weekend. But if Tulane loses guys to injuries at this stretch in the year, it's going to be really critical that the guys behind them are able to win these games. You're leaving a lot more of it up to chance if you let your starters close out these games and get a little more dominating, convincing victories. To me, I really think that this is the right approach here, where Tulane's getting the respect that I think they've deserved for a few weeks now, but whatever, and fair enough in terms of the rankings and polls. It all just comes down to what Tulane can control. That's towards getting a conference championship. But I think an important part of that is being able to see the pathway for yourselves. I think the starters can see that. But now you have an opportunity for the backups that play a lot in these games to be able to see that as well. And if you're able to get fresh legs by having really, a 1, 2, 3 punch on the depth chart across the board on, all positions, that is such an incredible competitive advantage for Tulane. It just can't be understated. So that's all going to really have to come together here. Special teams. I almost want to do my own side episode. I'm going to break that down on, my recap of this game because they really deserve a lot of kudos for what they've been able to do. They had a turnover that led to points in this game. Will Carroll has been, a critical weapon for this team. And that is going to come in handy, I think, in a game where if fresh legs start to kind of go a little haywire, you can really count on the field positioning by Will Carroll because, man, it just really has been something to watch. And I've seen one great punter at my time at Tulane and Ryan Wright. I just feel like that switch just flipped a few weeks ago for Will Carroll. And I feel like I'm seeing, the 2.0, but in his own way, because they're both just incredible. And when I'm this excited to talk about special teams on a team that is winning a ton of football games, ultimately you're in a good spot. And that's kind of where I'm at with my analysis. So to me, you go into Thursday, we legitimately leave in 2 days for this game. Happy Halloween. You play a game. I don't really care what the end score is. I just think getting out of this victory and being able to have a long week of rest before what I think will be a more manageable opponent in the Temple Owls, especially with the juice of homecoming. That's not to undersell that opponent, but Rice, again, is just a team that's clicking in all of the right phases. And Tulane's now reestablished themselves as that team to beat, and they're going to get every best shot here on out. So it's good to see them kind of working on their own counter punches in different ways as the season's gone on. With that, y'all, I will see you after the Charlotte game.